Happy Sunday, everybody. This is Father Jose, and this weekend I didn't get to preach at church because we had the missionaries, and so the missionaries were preaching the mission appeal to our community, telling us about the beautiful things that they do for the poorest among the poor. So I figured I would make a little recording on a reflection of some of the things that we can talk about on this 23rd Sunday in Ordinary Time. In a particular way, what really caught my attention was the second reading, which is the letter to the Romans, chapter 13. And especially the part where St. Paul says, "Owe nothing to anyone except to love one another." It really caught my attention. Owe nothing to anyone, because every time I hear the word owe or debt, I kind of cringe, and I can tell you about that later. But this is what St. Paul says: "Owe nothing to anyone except to love one another, for the one who loves another has fulfilled the law." And towards the end of that reading, we hear, "Love does no evil to the neighbor, hence love is the fulfillment of the law." And so what St. Paul is trying to get to us is that the only thing that we are to owe one another is love, because that's the way that Christ loved us. But besides that, we are not to owe nothing to anyone. So let's talk about that. What is it to owe something to someone? And what is it to be in debt to someone? And so let's talk about that. So as I mentioned, I have a love and hate relationship with debt, because basically to live in debt is living in a future that is not yet here, because we still owe it. And it's like walking around with a chain around your neck, because you're not free. You're not free when you are in debt to anyone about anything. When we were hearing today the message from the missionary from the Missionary Society of St. Paul, they are priests from Nigeria. They were telling us about how they serve the poorest among the poor. I mean, basic stuff such as water that people have to walk miles in carrying buckets, And here I have a fish tanks. And here in Michigan, water is very wide available to all of us, unless the water is contaminated. And we, in our area, we know very well that is very possible after the Flint crisis. So the missionaries were talking about how those basic needs of water, food, that they have to provide, it's not just the sacraments that they give to the people of God, which is the most important thing, but all those other basic necessities. And so they had to do it with the resources that are available to them. And for that reason, our parishes contribute to the mission so that they can do that work, so that they may not get in debt as they help their people, but actually to help from what they have received. And so it was very interesting to hear the perspective from the missionaries, and certainly it puts things in perspective to all of us who live in first world countries. When we talk about debts, when we talk about owing to people, and this reflection is going to go towards the line of financial stewardship, I think of a couple of things. Is the difference between needs and wants. And this is what happens is that, especially here in the United States, we make so many superfluous purchases. We just shop until you drop. We just keep buying and buying things, and we think that that's going to bring us happiness. And so we don't really know how to distinguish between needs and wants. When we pray to God for special blessings, God is going to give us what we need, because not everything that we want is what we actually need. When it comes to the theme of financial stewardship, I have to share some personal experiences with debt or with lack of financial resources in order to have the basic things of life. I am 43 years old, but I remember this was in 1990 in my home country of Peru. I was 10 years old. We had a financial phenomenon that was called the paquetazo. And what was the paquetazo? Basically, it was the Minister of Finances of the country that came on TV and told the entire nation, okay, folks, for the last 5 years, we have been living in a lie because the previous government, which was a socialist style or socialist-like government, still capitalist but using a lot of socialist principles, that previous government basically had all of us living in a lie because the majority of products in our home country, they were subsidized. Everything, I mean, from food to gasoline, you name it. All those basic necessities, we were paying only a fraction of what they really cost because the government was subsidizing them so that it would cost us less. Of course, when you live in that type of society, you think the government is helping you until the piggy bank runs out, and then you have to live in reality, right? And so that's exactly what happened with that paquetazo, because the Minister of Finances just came on TV and he said, well, beginning tomorrow, we are going to pay the real prices. So if this object cost 10 yesterday, tomorrow is going to cost 100. Or if this product you used to pay 20, tomorrow is going to cost 150. So you can imagine how the nation was in shock. This was another economical shock, we also call it. And I was only 10 years old. And I remember because people just went crazy. I mean, they had to display the army in front of all the stores because people were just ransacking all the stores in desperation because just like the prices went up or they went back to real prices, which we were not paying for the previous 5 years, now that people needed these products, the stipends or the salaries did not go up, okay? So, and that's part of the shock, is that the prices go up, but salaries don't. And so this was a shocking moment for our country. And I think even though I was already struggling with obesity at that particular time, but it was very minimal, very small compared to what became later, because suddenly everything changed, like even in our diets. And so suddenly we had to choose the cheapest food possible because it was impossible to pay real price for good products, for example. And so normally what are the cheapest foods that are out there are the most fattening things, such as carbohydrates like rice. Rice was cheaper than meat and than vegetables and than fruits. And so I believe those were the beginnings of my lifelong struggle of obesity, and all because of a financial decision that was made, and we needed that change because we needed to live in reality, but it was still shocking, So, anyways, so we went through several years of trying to adjust to real prices. We never went back to subsidizing anything, thank Lord. But we learned to live with real prices. But then something else happened like 10 years later, so about the 2000s. And that was about the time that I was ready to leave Peru and come to the U.S. What happened in the 2000s is that suddenly we started to have more and more shopping malls in Peru. We didn't have too many before. Like before, if you wanted to make purchases or you want to buy food, you didn't go to a supermarket because they were non-existent in the majority of the country, except in Lima. You will have some nice supermarkets. But besides that, you wanted to buy food, you just went to the farmer's market. And so just a regular farmer's market where you could buy your fresh food and all of that. But now we started to have superstores in the 2000s. And more advertisement. And therefore, our diets change, the way that we dress change, and this immediate desire of everyone to be more like in the first world, and therefore we have to dress up, and therefore we have to buy things no longer in the farmer's market but in the supermarket. And of course, all these stores, they also came with their financial assistance, or they came with their own banks, so that you can have these special credit cards with special points that if you would use them, then you would be able to live in a higher standard. The only problem is that the people didn't have money. So this is the starting point of people getting in a lot of debt in my country. Even something that happened to me like 3 years ago or 4 years ago, I remember going to a supermarket and in Peru, visiting my family, and I just bought my shopping for the day. And when I had all my bags ready to pay, the cashier asked me, do you want to pay in full or do you want to pay in parts? And if in parts, how many? And I was in shock, because it's not that I was buying a big TV that I could pay in parts. No, this was groceries. And when you go for groceries one day, next week you have to go again. So how am I going to pay in parts for groceries? Because there will be more parts to be next week when I come back again to buy groceries. You see what I'm saying? I was in shock that they made it so easy for people to get in debt. And so our people would live in the illusion of being able to acquire all these things for a higher standard of living, but not paying it with real money, but actually getting in debt for that. So it's way too easy in these days to get in debt in this day and age. I heard the other day, this guy, Dave Ramsey, used to say, we get things we don't need with money we don't have to impress people we don't like. So true, so true. Another thing that he says is that financial life is 80% behavior and 20% is math. 80% behavior, 20% math. And this is absolutely true. And we all have been in that particular circumstance in which we have this impulse, this desire to buy something, and we want it, and gosh, I'm going to get it. I don't have money, but I'm going to get it. And so suddenly we get in debt for these things that we don't really need, and we get in terrible trouble for doing that. And so it's interesting that how St. Paul starts this chapter 13 of Letter to the Romans by saying, owe nothing to anyone except love. That you must owe. But besides everything else, owe nothing to anyone. There is so much freedom in not owing anything to anyone. But love, we must owe. Another thing that comes to my mind is to live is to give. To live is to give. And this is the aspect of generosity. When we are able to take care of our personal needs, when people work, they are able to get a salary, they are able to support their families, and they don't get in debt, and then they give. They have the freedom to give, because you cannot give what you don't have. When a person is in debt, in general, that person may not necessarily give, because they can't. Because the minute that they have some money to give, they have to put it into the debt. Otherwise, the debt is going to become bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. Mm-hmm. And this is another thing that I have been pastor in several parishes, and I have had different experiences of financial stewardship in different parishes. And now that I am here at All Saints, when we first merged, we had a tremendous debt. And it was like a chain around our necks. It didn't allow us to breathe. We couldn't do anything else because the only thing that was over us was that horrible debt. And little by little, with the generosity of our parishioners, we were able to get out of it. And seriously, when we paid the debt, I wanted to call the Ramsey Show to do my debt-free scream. I don't know if you've seen those on TV, but I just call Father Andy to scream and say, we are debt-free. But there is so much freedom when we are not in debt. And I realize that sometimes you have to get in debt in some circumstances, like, for example, when people have to finance a house, like a mortgage. We understand that there are things that is impossible to acquire just with cash. But the reality is that we get in debt even for much, much smaller things, because once again, financial life is 80% behavior, 20% is just math. Most of it is the behavior. Another thing that I think of is that we just cannot wait for the government to save us. We have to pay our loans. And that's the thing, is that when we make a loan, when we owe something, that's something that we wanted to enter into. Therefore, if we promise that we would pay something, we have to pay it. There is a responsibility that comes with it. We just cannot wait forever and ever to the government to save us. They won't. I mean, we have a perfect example right now in the crisis of the student loans. And so many promises and nothing came through. No, if we acquire a debt, that means that we have to man up and pay our debts. Of course, there is room for the forgiveness of debts, but when it comes to the government will never save us. Actually, the government will take all our money, and that's what we do every time we pay all our taxes. And so we just have to rely on what we can within our means, to live within our means. Of course, there is always social support for the poor, and this is welcome, and thank God there are programs like that in this country. For example, if you are in that particular circumstance, for example, that disability or unemployment, thank God we have those social services that help people momentarily, temporarily, and always being mindful that somebody has to pay for it, because it's going to come from everybody. Eventually, it's going to affect everybody. This special help doesn't come just from the air. It's not like suddenly it'll disappear. No, it has to come from somewhere. And so we have to be mindful of that, and especially those that have benefit from this special social support, to realize that it's a blessing, but at the same time it's temporary, that we should not abuse the systems, that eventually we have to support others, because it is all going to come from our taxes at the end of the day. Another thing of financial stewardship is what we call the impulse buys. And so this happens a lot. This happens in people's lives. It happened in my life too. For example, I mean, you guys know that I love fish keeping, and for a while I was pretty obsessed with one specific type of fish, and this is a hobby, and a hobby is not a need, it's a want. Okay, and so eventually I had to decide whether to keep it or not. Because there are fish that are pretty expensive, I can tell you that. And yet at the same time, which one was the fish that gave me so much joy and laughter? Luke. And Luke was the best $12 I ever spent in my life. That's how cheap he was, okay? So you don't have to have expensive things to be happy. You can be just as happy with simpler things. So there was a point in which I had to just stop myself and saying I need to be a good steward of my personal finances, and therefore it's not necessary to continue having this expensive hobby. We can have something simpler. That way I can continue doing my Bible museum, which is another expense that helps to educate people from the Bible. So and of course the Bible museum brings me so much happiness in being able to teach others about the Bible. Then another aspect of stewardship could be not working in accordance to what one was hired for. So this is about working stewardship. So I'm thinking of workers that don't really work up to par to what they were hired for. Trying to work the system, not really fully working, not really working at the standards that is expected for them. Lazy workers. Sometimes workers can become parasites in a company or in a working environment. Instead of giving, they are taking all the time. And so this begs the examination of conscience. Am I really working at the capacity that I have and what I was hired for? Because if not, I'm stealing. If I'm not working to the capacity I was hired for, I'm stealing from whoever hired me. So it's about honesty, it's about integrity, it's about really being at the service of what we are being hired for example. And the last one, that in this country especially, it's so easy to get in debt. There is a running joke at the office here that every week I get pre-approved for a $500,000 loan. And I'm not kidding. I mean, I do get those big envelopes that have advertising saying, you are pre-approved. You have been selected for this loan. And people fall into these traps. And they may have this, we may have this idea that suddenly because this cash becomes available to us through debt, that suddenly all our problems are going to go away, except that they are just put a pause and a chain around our necks until they suffocate us. So you can tell that I have some strong opinions about debt. I hate debt. I absolutely hate debt. And so when St. Paul in Romans 13 says, owe nothing to anyone, it really immediately raises a flag because this is something that I personally have experienced through my life. But we must owe love, says St. Paul. We must owe love because that's the way that Jesus has loved us. We say that Jesus on the cross paid the debt of Adam. Paid the debt of Adam to the eternal Father. We sing this in the Exultet at the Easter Vigil. And that Jesus came to forgive our trespasses. Forgive us our debts as we forgive those who are in debt with us. The old version of the Our Father. So that means that we must owe love to each other. That this is the only thing that we must owe to each other, love. So may these words be reflection on each individual stewardship, financial stewardship, how we give, how we are generous, because to live is to give. And I can tell you from personal experience, I feel it all the time. This is very much part of my life. To give away, because a portion, everything that I have received is from God, but a portion must be given away. It has to leave my hands. It's amazing. It really makes you free. It really makes you realize that everything that you have is a gift from God, and therefore we must share it with others. And it changes you. It changes me. It changes also the person that receives the gift, but it mainly changes you because it makes you detached from what you have, because what you have to begin with is not from you, is coming from God. And it comes back 100-fold. It comes back 100-fold. And when we give, we must give out of love and not out of guilt. You probably are very familiar with all those videos that appear on TV, and there is a sick puppy, and you're like, oh, and they are designed to make you give out of guilt. That's not charity. That's not charity. That's extortion. When we give, we must give out of love and not out of guilt. And I can tell you from personal experience, God will bless you 1,000-fold, 100-fold, like He promised in the Gospels. Owe nothing to anyone, says St. Paul, except love, because love is the fulfillment of the law. God bless you and have a good week.